The terrier's gray muzzle rests against the window as the meeting convenes 3 floors below. 23 residents, 47 family members, and 1 vote that will decide whether a 15-year-old dog gets to stay in the place his dying owner chose for him. At Meadowbrook Assisted Living, Harold and Vera Castellano face an impossible choice. Their daughter Lily is gone. Their home is sold. And now their own children, led by their eldest son, a corporate attorney who couldn't look at his sister's dog without seeing everything he'd failed to fix, want Scout removed from the only stability the elderly couple has left. The facility director agrees. The policy is clear. 72 hours to comply, or face eviction at 76 and 74 years old. But something unexpected happens when a night shift worker named Marcus Reed finds Vera crying in the courtyard at 2 a.m., whispering to the dog about the daughter no one will say out loud anymore. Marcus has seen institutions crush people before, watched it happen to his own grandmother. This time, he decides to document everything. This time, he asks a different question. Who actually complained? Not residents, family members, people who visit twice a month and make decisions for people who live here every single day. What Marcus discovers in the facility's dusty bylaws changes everything. The residents have a voice, if they're brave enough to use it. Have you ever watched someone you love lose the right to decide what brings them comfort? Have you seen a family member's good intentions become another person's cage? Stay with us to witness what happens when 23 elderly residents, some with walkers, some losing words to dementia, some who haven't spoken in months, stand up to prove that remembering the dead matters as much as protecting the living, and that a dog might be the last honest witness to a daughter's love. The moving truck's brakes hissed in the October drizzle as Harold Castellano watched his daughter's handwriting disappear into Meadowbrook's storage closet. Kitchen. Fragile, Lily had written 18 months ago. Her terminal diagnosis 3 weeks old, her handwriting still steady. She'd labeled every box in their house during those final weeks, organizing the dismantling of her parents' 43 years in one place. Dad, you need to sign here. Mitchell thrust a clipboard forward without meeting Harold's eyes. Corporate attorney efficiency, even on moving day. Director already approved Scout. Non-issue. Scout pressed against Harold's leg, nose working the unfamiliar air. The terrier mix had ridden between them in the front seat, gray muzzle on Vera's lap, searching for the scent that would never come. Mom? Diane touched Vera's shoulder. Want me to unpack the kitchen? Vera nodded, silent since they'd crossed the threshold, 74 years old, and she'd said 3 words today. Is this it? Kevin hauled the last box, Lily's things in, his youngest sister's careful script, and set it in the corner like it might detonate. I can stay if you need. You have that sales conference. Mitchell answered for their father, always answering. We've got it handled. The children left in a convoy of obligation. Scout immediately began his search, corners, doorways, under the bed where Lily's scent might hide. The apartment was 400 square feet of beige carpet and fluorescent mercy. Harold counted. 12 boxes, 2 suitcases, 1 dog who'd outlived his owner. Vera, he tried her name like a question. She was unpacking the kitchen box, methodical and mute. She found the flannel shirt folded between dish towels, Lily's favorite, the blue plaid she'd worn during good days between treatments. Vera held it to her face, breathing deep. Scout's ears pricked. He crossed the room, nails clicking on linoleum, and pressed his body against Vera's knees. She sank to the floor, the shirt between them, and the dog curled into the nest of fabric and grief. His whole body exhaled. Harold watched from the doorway. The hospice nurse had warned them, dogs mourn. Scout had spent 2 years searching for Lily in every room of their old house. Now they'd brought him somewhere she'd never been, to a place where her absence was architecture. "We should walk him before dinner." Harold's postal worker voice, steady from 35 years of routine. "Policy says 6 a.m. and 6 p.m., courtyard only." Vera nodded into the flannel. Scout's breathing had synchronized with hers, the way he used to match Lily's labored rhythm during the morphine nights. They unpacked in silence as evening fell. Harold assembled the photos he'd been forbidden to hang at Kevin's suggestion. Too depressing. Vera made the bed with sheets that still smelled like their old house. Scout stayed on Lily's shirt, guarding what remained. At midnight, Harold reached across the narrow mattress and found his wife's hand. Scout slept between them on the floor, dreaming of someone who wouldn't answer when he woke. The courtyard at dawn was October cold. The grass still silver with dew. Harold had Scout on the approved leash, 6 feet, no retractable, per the handbook Mitchell had highlighted for him. The terrier lifted his leg against the designated pet area marker, performing his morning ritual with geriatric dignity. "That animal needs to be removed." Harold turned. A woman in a wheelchair blocked the path, her face arranged in professional outrage. Barbara Henning, according to her door placard. 89, sharp-eyed, vibrating with purpose. "Ma'am, I'm sorry if we startled. I'm severely allergic. This is a health hazard." She hadn't looked at Scout, who sat calmly 15 feet away. "I'm reporting this to management immediately." She wheeled toward the building before Harold could respond. Scout tilted his head, confused by the anger directed at his existence. By 9 a.m., Harold was called to the director's office. Janine Crawford had been hired 6 months ago from hotel management, bringing hospitality's smile and healthcare's paperwork. She slid an incident report across her desk. "Mr. Castellano, we've received a complaint regarding your pet." "Scout." Harold kept his voice level. "His name is Scout. He's certified, vaccinated. My son cleared this. The previous director made certain allowances." Janine's smile was laminated. "I'm implementing updated safety protocols. Mrs. Henning's daughter called 3 times this morning regarding liability. Hospital administrator very concerned about her mother's respiratory issues." Harold had delivered mail for 35 years. He knew when someone was reading from a script. "Scout was my daughter's therapy dog. She trained him during her treatment. I understand this is emotional." Janine's tone suggested she didn't. "But one resident's comfort can't compromise another's safety. We need you to sign this acknowledgement of the complaint." Vera signed without reading, her hand shaking badly enough that the signature looked forged. Harold wanted to grab the pen, to argue, to produce documentation. Instead, he watched his wife fold into herself, diminishing. That evening, Scout refused his dinner. He sat by the door, ears alert for footsteps that would never come, anxiety radiating from his small body. Harold recognized the posture. Scout had done this before chemotherapy appointments, before ambulance visits, before the hospice bed arrived. The dog knew when families were fracturing. Vera sat on the floor beside him, stroking his gray muzzle, whispering words Harold couldn't hear. Through the window, he watched residents navigate the courtyard paths, returning from dinner, moving through their contained lives. He thought about Lily labeling boxes, organizing their downsizing while her own body shut down. "Be kind to each other," she'd written in a letter they'd found after. "And keep Scout close. He knows how to sit with sadness." Harold looked at his silent wife and the anxious dog and the 400 square feet they now called home. He wondered what Lily would say if she could see them here, already failing her last request. The formal letter arrived on day 4, slipped under their door like an eviction notice. Harold found it at dawn, Scout pressing against his leg as he read the corporate letterhead 3 times before the words solidified into meaning. Multiple complaints, revised policy interpretation, 72 hours to comply or face lease termination. He sat on the edge of the bed, the paper trembling in his hands. 35 years as a postal worker had taught him to trust documentation, to believe that following procedures guaranteed fairness. He pulled out their signed lease agreement, the reading glasses Lily had picked out for him 2 Christmases ago, and searched the fine print until his eyes burned. Nowhere. The word pet appeared nowhere in the prohibition clauses. Mitchell, he dialed his oldest son at 8 a.m., knowing he'd be awake, always working. "We need... Dad, I'm in depositions all day. Can this wait? They're threatening to evict us. Because of Scout." A pause. Harold heard papers shuffling, a door closing. "I told you to keep him low profile. What happened?" One woman complained. Her daughter, actually. The resident never... It doesn't matter who complained. Mitchell's attorney voice, reasonable and immovable. What matters is liability exposure. "I'll look at it tonight, but Dad, maybe it's time to consider alternatives. There are good boarding facilities. Your sister asked us to keep him." The silence lasted 5 seconds. "Lily's gone. We're managing reality here, not wishes." Harold ended the call before his voice could crack. He tried Diane next, who answered on the first ring with her real estate cheerfulness already in place. "Dad, how's the new place? They want to take Scout." The brightness dimmed. "Oh, Mitchell mentioned this might be an issue. Have you thought about boarding just temporarily until things settle?" "Nothing settles, Diane. Lily's been gone 2 years. When does it settle?" "Dad," her voice dropped to the soothing tone she used with difficult clients. "You and Mom have been through so much. Maybe not making waves right now is..." He hung up. Kevin's phone went straight to voicemail. It had gone straight to voicemail for 3 weeks. That night at 2 a.m., Harold woke to find Vera's side of the bed empty. He found her in the courtyard, sitting on the damp bench with Scout curled in her lap, her fingers buried in his gray fur. "Lily trained you, didn't she?" She was whispering to the dog, the first real words Harold had heard from her in days. "You were hers first. You remember her laugh? Tell me you remember her laugh." Scout's tail thumped once against her thigh. "Mr. Castellano?" Harold turned. A young man stood in the doorway. Marcus, the night activities coordinator. 20-something, wearing thrift store khakis and perpetual exhaustion. Harold had seen him mopping floors, setting up bingo tables, treating residents like people instead of problems. Marcus didn't say anything else, just sat down on the other end of the bench, giving Vera space, giving them all space. 20 minutes passed. A siren wailed somewhere in the distance. The October wind moved through empty trees. Finally, Vera spoke without lifting her head. "My daughter died. Cancer. 38 years old. Scout was hers. I'm sorry." Marcus's voice carried something Harold recognized, the specific gravity of someone who'd already lost everything. "They want him gone in 3 days." Marcus nodded slowly. "Can I see your paperwork?" Marcus spent his overnight shifts differently after that. The facility quieted after midnight. Residents sleeping, hallway lights dimmed to amber. Only the occasional call button breaking the silence. He sat at the nurse's station with his phone and the documents Harold had given him, photographing each page under the fluorescent hum. The lease agreement was clear. Companion animals permitted with proper documentation and management approval. Signed by Director Thomas Chen, the man corporate had fired 6 months ago for budget inefficiencies. Janine Crawford's signature appeared nowhere. Marcus pulled up Meadowbrook's parent corporation on his phone. Life Care Solutions, LLC. 12 facilities acquired in 18 months. He scrolled through news archives, finding pattern after pattern. New directors from hospitality backgrounds, revised policies that prioritized efficiency, resident complaints about reduced autonomy. He knew this script. He'd watched it play out with his grandmother's facility before she died. Before he'd been able to move her somewhere better. At 4 a.m. on night 6, he found Harold awake in the apartment, surrounded by boxes labeled in someone else's handwriting. Scout's belongings were packed. The blue flannel shirt, the food bowls, the leash Lily had bought the summer before her diagnosis. Can't risk Vera being homeless. Harold's voice was hollowed out. We gave up our house when Mitchell said we couldn't maintain it. If they evict us now, I don't know where we'd... How many residents have actually complained? Marcus sat on the floor, crossing his legs like he had all night. Not family members. Residents. Harold looked up. I don't know. Neither does Janine. Marcus pulled out his phone, showing Harold the corporate directive he'd photographed from the bulletin board. Minimize liability exposure. Prioritize family member satisfaction over resident requests. She never surveyed the people who actually live here. Mitchell says fighting this could take months, cost thousands. Mitchell's not the one losing his home. Marcus stood, decision made. Give me until your deadline. Let me run an experiment first. Something in the young man's directness cut through Harold's paralysis. No practiced patience, no managing tone. Just a question that assumed Harold still had the right to choose. What kind of experiment? The scientific kind. Evidence, data, documentation. Marcus checked his watch. Mrs. Chen's door opens at 6 a.m. every morning. She's up early. I'm going to ask her if she likes dogs. That's your plan? First step of it. Marcus moved toward the door, then stopped. Your daughter trained Scout for a reason. Let's find out if her work survived her. Harold watched the young man disappear into the dim hallway. This stranger who worked 2 jobs and stayed past his shift to fight battles that weren't his. Scout lifted his head from the flannel shirt, ears pricked toward hope that defied reason. Lily would like him, Harold whispered to the dog. She always trusted people who showed up. At 6 a.m., Marcus knocked on Eleanor Chen's door. Mrs. Chen? I'm Marcus, Night Activities. Do you have a minute? I want to ask you about dogs. Marcus called it Operation Evidence in the Notes app on his cracked phone screen. Harold called it the most unconventional experiment he'd witnessed in 76 years of cautious living. Day 7 began with Eleanor Chen opening her door at 6:15 a.m., already dressed, hair pinned with the precision of someone who'd run a restaurant kitchen for 40 years. You want to know if I like dogs? Not a question. She studied Marcus with the expression of someone deciding whether to trust a new supplier. Come in. Bring the Castellanos. Bring Scout. The terrier entered her apartment with the careful dignity of age, moving slowly enough that Mrs. Chen could track his approach. When he sat 3 feet from her chair, waiting as Lily had trained him, something shifted in the widow's face. My last Pomeranian died 2 years ago. May, 14 pounds of opinion. Her hand extended. Scout moved forward, placed his gray muzzle beneath her palm. Oh, you know this. Someone taught you to receive touch instead of demanding it. Marcus photographed the interaction. Timestamp, resident name, duration. Mrs. Chen signed his simple form without reading it. I enjoyed meeting Scout. He had 16 more residents on his list. By day 8, Marcus had traded shifts with the day coordinator, working doubles on 4 hours of sleep and gas station coffee. Frank Morrison came third on the schedule. Stroke survivor, 3 months silent. Eyes that tracked everything with furious intelligence. Scout approached Frank's paralyzed left side, the weaker territory others avoided. The dog sat, then slowly leaned his weight against Frank's leg. The pressure, steady and warm. Frank's functional right hand lifted, trembling, and came to rest on Scout's head. The sound caught in Frank's damaged throat. Good. His daughter, visiting, started crying before the word finished. Frank kept his hand on the dog, kept trying. Good, boy. Marcus's phone captured it. The timestamp, the breakthrough, the evidence that Scout wasn't just comfort, he was catalyst. Ana Torres presented the most remarkable transformation. The dementia patient sat in her chair by the window, hands restless in her lap, words scattered somewhere she couldn't reach. Her daughter Sophia had warned Marcus, "Mom's having a difficult week. She probably won't respond." But Scout knew his work. He moved to Anna's feet, rested his chin on her knee. An invitation, not a demand. Her hands found his ears, began the rhythmic stroking that muscle memory still carried from 35 years teaching kindergarten. Perito bueno. Clear words in Spanish, perfectly articulated. Tan suave. So soft. Sophia's professional composure cracked. She hasn't spoken coherently in 3 weeks. Marcus documented everything. 17 residents over 3 days. 17 signatures. 17 moments when Scout stopped being a problem and became proof. On day 9, Barbara Henning's roommate requested a visit. The first resident to actively seek Scout out. Barbara, trapped in their shared room, watched from her wheelchair as the dog sat exactly 6 feet away, respecting her declared boundary while her roommate giggled like a child. The 72-hour deadline passed at midnight. Harold didn't surrender Scout. Janine didn't follow through with eviction. The uneasy stalemate held, fragile as October frost, while Marcus compiled his evidence and Harold watched strangers smile at them in hallways. Vera, who hadn't created anything in 2 years, started sketching again. Quick pencil studies of Scout with the residents, capturing what her daughter's dog had become. A bridge between grief and the radical possibility of connection. Mitchell's BMW pulled into Meadowbrook's lot at 11 a.m. on day 11, 3 hours earlier than his quarterly scheduled visit. Harold watched from the window as his eldest son collected his briefcase with the mechanical precision of someone preparing for battle. "He knows," Vera whispered. Scout pressed against her leg, sensing the shift in atmospheric pressure that preceded family storms. The confrontation happened in the dining hall during lunch service. Mitchell didn't sit. Standing conveyed authority. Reduce this to a business transaction rather than a father requiring his son's actual presence. "Dad, what part of legal exposure don't you understand?" Mitchell's voice carried across tables where residents pretended to focus on their meatloaf. "You ignored my advice. Now you've created liability for everyone here." Harold set down his fork with postal worker steadiness. Scout was approved by the previous director. Previous, exactly. New administration, new protocols. Mitchell pulled out his phone, scrolling through emails like evidence exhibits. "I spoke with Janine this morning. She's been more than accommodating, and you've made her job impossible." "Mitchell." Vera's voice, unused for days, cracked on his name. He didn't look at her. Couldn't. Looking meant seeing grief he'd spent 2 years avoiding. Mrs. Chen walked past their table, deliberately slow. She stopped, turned to Mitchell with the authority of someone who'd spent 40 years managing a restaurant kitchen and wouldn't tolerate disrespect in any dining room. "Your parents have been through enough." 7 words, quiet but absolute. Then she continued to her seat, leaving Mitchell's attorney composure fractured in public. The remaining lunch crowd watched him redden, watched him choose retreat over acknowledgement. He left without saying goodbye, his exit marked by the dining hall door's pneumatic hiss. By 3 p.m., Janine appeared at their door with a revised ultimatum. Her hands shook slightly as she delivered corporate's new directive. Scout banned from all common areas immediately. Confinement to the 400-square-foot apartment. Violations result in immediate eviction, no appeal process. "I'm sorry," she said, and Harold believed she meant it. Fear made people enforcers of cruelties they'd never choose freely. Marcus found the memo during his 10 p.m. shift change, taped to the staff bulletin board with aggressive precision. Below it, partially visible, a corporate directive someone had tried to bury. Minimize liability exposure. Prioritize family member satisfaction over resident requests. He photographed both documents, the flash stark in the empty hallway. That night, he helped Harold arrange puppy pads throughout the apartment. Temporary solutions for a 15-year-old dog who had never been fully housebound. Scout paced between the door and window, whining softly, searching for the courtyard grass he could smell but not reach. Vera sat on the floor in Lily's flannel shirt, silent again, watching their daughter's dog begin the anxiety spiral that had nearly killed him after Lily died. Marcus knelt beside her. "This isn't over." She looked at him with eyes that had watched her youngest daughter's body fail, that had buried her child against every natural order. Eyes that knew exactly how systems crushed people who couldn't fight back. "Yes," she whispered. "It is." Marcus spent day 13 violating every employment boundary he'd carefully maintained. Personal phone calls during shift, sharing resident information, using facility resources for advocacy that could cost him his job. Worth it. Mrs. Chen answered on the second ring. "Marcus, it's midnight. Your son David, the journalist. Does he still cover elder care issues?" Silence, then. "We don't speak much. He's busy." Mrs. Chen, Scout's being erased. Harold and Vera are being erased. This is happening because corporate thinks nobody's watching. He took a breath. What if someone was? At 9 a.m., day 14, David Chen arrived at Meadowbrook with press credentials and questions about resident quality of life protocols. His mother greeted him in the lobby with careful formality. 15 months of quarterly visits had carved distance between them. But she led him to residents who'd met Scout, to Frank Morrison's daughter who worked as a paralegal, to Ana Torres, whose nurse daughter Sophia understood therapeutic intervention documentation. David took notes. David asked follow-ups. David saw a story about corporate elder care facilities prioritizing liability over humanity, about families who visited twice monthly, making decisions for people who lived somewhere every single day. His article went live that evening. Who decides what seniors need? By midnight, it had been shared 200 times. Local news reached out. Corporate's regional office called Janine at 11:47 p.m. Marcus heard her phone ringing through the administrative office door he definitely shouldn't have been standing near. Day 15 brought the risk management specialist, mid-40s, expensive suit, never made eye contact with residents. He interviewed Janine for 3 hours, reviewed files, photographed policy documents. left without speaking to Harold, Vera, or anyone who actually lived at Meadowbrook. That evening, Janine announced an emergency family meeting. Mandatory attendance, residents excluded. Scheduled for day 20. Her memo used phrases like address concerns and facility-wide well-being and revised protocols. Marcus recognized the language. Corporate preparing to steamroll. He found Sophia in Anna's room during evening visiting hours. Anna was having a difficult day, hands restless, words scattered. But when Sophia showed her a photo of Scout on her phone, something shifted, clarity breaking through fog. "Perito," Anna said. Clear, present. "Donde está el perito?" Sophia's professional nurse composure cracked. She looked at Marcus. "This is medical evidence. Quantifiable therapeutic response." "I know," he said. "But they'll bury it in liability language and risk assessments." "Then we don't let them." Sophia pulled out her phone. "I'm a nurse supervisor. I have access to research databases, medical journals, therapeutic intervention protocols. If they want evidence, we'll give them evidence they can't dismiss." Marcus showed her his documentation. 17 residents, timestamps, photographs, engagement measurements. Sophia started typing, already translating his advocacy into medical terminology that carried institutional weight. They worked until Anna fell asleep, Scout's image still glowing on the phone screen beside her pillow. Outside, Harold stood in the courtyard with his hands in his pockets, looking up at the window where Scout pressed his nose against glass, still searching for the daughter who'd trained him to comfort the dying. David Chen's article went viral by day 16, shared across elder care advocacy groups, picked up by regional news outlets, forwarded through email chains by adult children who recognized their own parents' facilities in the story's institutional cruelty. Janine's phone rang at 6 a.m. Corporate's regional supervisor, voice tight with controlled fury. "Contain this, today." The risk management specialist arrived by noon, clipboard in hand, expensive suit armor against human messiness. He interviewed Janine behind closed doors for 3 hours, never spoke to residents, never asked Harold or Vera their side. Just photographed policy documents, reviewed incident reports, calculated liability exposure with the emotional investment of someone pricing insurance premiums. By 4 p.m., he was gone. By 5 p.m., Janine posted the announcement. Emergency family meeting, day 20, mandatory attendance. Agenda: revised pet policies and resident well-being protocols. Mitchell called his parents at 6 p.m. "Don't attend. Let me handle this professionally. You'll make it emotional, and emotions lose in institutional settings." Harold hung up mid-sentence. First time in 76 years, he'd ended a call on his own child. Scout's confinement was destroying what the courtyard ban hadn't broken. The dog paced their 400 square feet in endless loops, whining at the door where residents used to knock requesting visits. He refused food for 2 days straight. His gray muzzle developed a tremor Vera recognized from the weeks after Lily died, when Scout had searched every room of their old house, convinced his person was just hiding. "He thinks he did something wrong," Vera whispered to Harold on day 18 at midnight, both of them awake, watching their daughter's dog disintegrate from purposelessness. Marcus violated every rule that night. He brought Scout to Anna's room at 11 p.m. when hallways emptied, and security cameras had the blind spots he'd memorized. Anna was having one of her clear evenings, rare gifts dementia occasionally offered before stealing them back. She stroked Scout's ears with the muscle memory of 35 years teaching kindergarten, hands that remembered gentleness even when words scattered. Why are they hurting the old people? Sophia arrived for her late visit, found them, and Marcus braced for consequences. But she just knelt beside her mother and the dog and asked the question that changed everything. What would it take to give residents actual power here? Marcus pulled up the facility bylaws on his phone, documents he'd been studying during overnight shifts. There, buried in Section 7, subsection C, the Resident Council holds voting authority on quality of life matters affecting the general population. Janine disbanded the council 2 years ago, Sophia said. Called it streamlining decision-making processes. Disbanding it doesn't erase the bylaws. Marcus was already texting his coalition, David Chen, Frank's daughter the paralegal, Mrs. Chen, the residents who'd signed his documentation. We resurrect it. We force a vote. Sophia looked at her mother, at Scout, at Marcus, with his cracked phone and gas station coffee courage. My mother has dementia, but she's still a citizen here. They can't just silence her. Anna smiled, clarity holding steady. Perito bueno, she said to Scout. Then to them, fight! Day 20 arrived with the weight of ultimatum. The emergency family meeting convened at 2 p.m. in the dining hall. 47 family members crowding tables usually reserved for residents eating institutional meatloaf in silence. Mitchell arrived early, positioned himself near Janine and the corporate specialist, his briefcase suggesting this was business requiring documentation rather than a father requiring courage. Janine opened with HR-approved efficiency, revised pet policies, lease amendments, 7-day compliance deadline. The language sanitized cruelty into bullet points. She never said eviction. She said transition support for non-compliant residents. Mitchell stood, his attorney voice filling the room with reasonable harm. I appreciate the administration's balanced approach. My parents' emotional attachment, while understandable given recent family loss, cannot supersede facility-wide well-being and liability concerns. Professional care facilities require professional standards. He never looked at Harold or Vera. Looking required acknowledging. David Chen rose from the back, press credentials visible. I'm curious why residents aren't present at a meeting determining their quality of life. The facility bylaws reference resident council authority on such matters. Janine's professional mask slipped slightly. The council is currently inactive. Actually, Marcus stood, holding a manila folder with the careful respect of someone who'd learned authority responded to proper documentation. 17 residents signed a petition 3 days ago requesting council reactivation per the exact protocol outlined in Section 7, subsection C of the facility bylaws. I'm submitting it now. He walked forward, handed Janine the petition. Each signature he'd collected during overnight shifts when residents couldn't sleep, when they'd whispered their stories about feeling invisible in the place where they lived every single day. The corporate specialist calculated rapidly. Media present, legal standing questionable, PR damage escalating. He made the decision that systems always make when witnesses emerge. Strategic concession. The council may convene to provide input, advisory capacity only. Day 25, 5 days from now. Mitchell cornered his parents in the hallway afterward, fury breaking through measured tones. You're making this worse. Scout is a dog. They'll vote against you. Then you'll have nothing. Vera spoke, her voice barely audible, but absolute. He's not a dog. He's all we have left of Lily. Mitchell went pale. First time anyone had said her name in his presence since the funeral. First time his control couldn't erase what it couldn't face. He walked away without responding. Kevin followed, always following, never deciding. Diane stayed, crying quietly against the wall, watching her parents stand together in the institutional hallway, choosing grief over peace, memory over Mitchell's version of moving forward. Harold took Vera's hand. They returned to their apartment where Scout waited, still searching for the daughter who'd trained him to sit with sadness without demanding it transform into something more comfortable for witnesses. 4 days until the vote. 4 days to prove remembering mattered. Marcus's coalition worked with the desperation of people who'd watched systems crush individuals before and refused to be complicit this time. Sophia compiled research, medical journals on animal-assisted therapy, case studies on dementia patients' response to tactile comfort, quantitative data that translated Scout's presence into language institutions couldn't dismiss as merely emotional. David Chen investigated deeper, finding the corporate pattern. 12 facilities acquired, 9 pet bans implemented, always after family complaints, never after resident surveys. His follow-up article made Meadowbrook's situation representative rather than isolated. How corporate elder care prioritizes liability over living. Harold typed testimonials, one finger pecking on his old laptop, transcribing the stories residents had shared. Vera baked cookies. Lily's recipe, the snickerdoodles she'd made for every holiday before cancer stole her strength for standing. She delivered them to every resident, Scout at her feet, choosing purpose over paralysis. Day 22 brought Tricia, Barbara's daughter, arriving unannounced with threats about personal liability lawsuits if Scout caused her mother any distress whatsoever. Harold, finding voice he'd suppressed for 2 years of being managed, asked the question that cut through her professional armor. When did you last visit your mother for longer than 30 minutes? Tricia left without answering, fury masking the truth they both recognized. That evening, Barbara's roommate found Marcus during his shift. Barbara told me something yesterday. She doesn't actually fear dogs. She fears being forgotten. Nobody fights for her the way people are fighting for Scout. She wanted that attention, even if it meant being against something. Kevin appeared on day 23, 3 weeks absent, finally returning calls. He sat with Scout for an hour, crying into the dog's gray fur, confessing he'd been avoiding Meadowbrook because seeing his parents here meant accepting Lily would never grow old, never have this future she'd organized for them before her body quit. Day 24, Diane pulled Harold aside with information that felt like betrayal and warning both. Mitchell planned to speak against Scout at tomorrow's council meeting. He genuinely believed ending this fight would let his parents move on properly from Lily. Harold lay awake that night, Vera beside him, Scout between them, as always. Tomorrow, their eldest son would publicly oppose them. Tomorrow, residents would vote on whether grief deserved accommodation or should be managed into institutional tidiness. He thought about Lily labeling moving boxes during her final weeks, organizing their future while dying. Be kind to each other, she'd written. Keep Scout close. He knows how to sit with sadness. Scout's breathing synchronized with Vera's, the rhythm they'd maintained since the hospice bed, the presence that witnessed what couldn't be fixed. Tomorrow, they'd ask 23 strangers to validate that memory mattered more than Mitchell's version of healing. Day 25 arrived with the crisp formality of reckoning. Marcus borrowed a microphone system from the Baptist church down the street, setting it up in the activity room where bingo cards usually marked time's passage. 23 chairs arranged in a semicircle, one for each resident able to attend, including wheelchairs positioned with dignity at eye level. Family members lined the walls like witnesses at a trial. Mitchell arrived early in his courtroom suit, positioning himself near Janine and the corporate specialist, his briefcase a shield against everything he couldn't control. George Weatherby took his place at the front, 83 years old, COPD stealing his breath but not his authority. Retired union organizer who'd spent 40 years fighting for auto workers' dignity, now fighting for residents' right to decide their own quality of life. This council convenes under Section 7, subsection C of Facility Bylaws. George announced, voice steady despite the oxygen cannula. Agenda item: proposed policy regarding companion animals and quality of life considerations. Janine presented first, her HR language sanitizing cruelty into bullet points. Safety protocols, liability concerns, majority preferences. She cited Barbara Henning's complaint, mentioned concerns from multiple families, never said that only one resident had actually objected, never admitted she'd never surveyed the people who lived here every single day. Mitchell stood next, and Harold watched his eldest son perform the reasonable harm he'd perfected. My parents' emotional attachment, while understandable given recent family loss, cannot supersede facility-wide well-being. Professional care facilities require professional standards. He never looked at Harold or Vera. Looking required acknowledging what he'd spent 2 years trying to erase. Diane wept silently against the back wall. Kevin studied his phone like it held answers to questions he couldn't ask. Then George opened the floor for resident testimony. Mrs. Chen spoke first, her accent carrying the weight of 40 years running a restaurant, 40 years caring for Pomeranians, 15 months of widowed loneliness. Scout's visits reminded me I'm still capable of joy. I thought that was gone. Frank Morrison's daughter held up her phone. His recorded voice, halting but clear, filled the room. The dog helped me speak. Silence. The kind that held all the words institutions had tried to silence. Ana Torres, having one of her rare clear mornings, stood with Sophia's help. She spoke in halting English and Spanish, her kindergarten teacher's hands gesturing toward memory. Touching Scout brings me back to when small beings needed gentle hands. To cuando yo era maestra, when I was still myself. Sophia added clinical data, her nurse supervisor's authority translating love into language systems couldn't dismiss. My mother's lucid episodes increased 40% during weeks with Scout visits. This is measurable therapeutic intervention. A man in his 90s, bedridden until last week, described watching the Castellanos' dawn walks from his window. It gave me a reason to wake up, to see if they'd be there. Barbara's roommate shocked everyone. Barbara doesn't hate the dog. She hates that nobody fights for her the way people are fighting for Scout. Then George called Harold forward. Harold stood slowly, Vera's hand in his, 76 years of deference to authority battling the quiet, stubborn dignity that emerged when everything else was already lost. He didn't read from notes. Couldn't. This required looking at faces, at his children, at strangers who'd become witnesses to his family's unraveling. Lily was our youngest, our only daughter. His postal worker's voice, steady from decades of routine, faltered on her name. She was 36 when they found the cancer, 38 when she died. Mitchell's jaw clenched. Kevin's phone went dark in his hands. She adopted Scout when she was 23. Trained him herself, obedience, therapy work, how to sit with people who were suffering. He went to every chemo appointment, every radiation session. He was there when we brought the hospice bed home. Harold's voice cracked. Vera's grip tightened. The last thing Lily said to me, 2 hours before she died, was, "Promise me you'll keep Scout. He knows how to sit with sadness without trying to fix it. You're going to need that." The room held its breath. Mitchell says we're grieving. Harold looked at his son directly for the first time in 2 years. He's right, we are. But Scout isn't our grief. Scout is the only one who remembers her laugh, the way she'd sing off key in the shower, how she'd sleep with one foot outside the blankets even in winter. His voice broke completely now. We're not asking you to save a dog. We're asking if remembering matters. if loving someone who died means anything. Or if we're supposed to pack it away, like those boxes in storage labeled in her handwriting that none of our children can bear to open. Harold sat down. The silence was broken only by crying. Residents, family members, even the corporate specialist shifting uncomfortably. George called Vera forward. She walked to the microphone, barely audible, but everyone leaned in because her rare words carried the weight of prolonged silence. After Lily died, I couldn't speak for 3 months. Scout was the only one who sat with my silence and didn't demand I perform recovery. Her eyes found Mitchell, Kevin, Diane. You all wanted him gone 6 months ago. Mitchell found a nice farm. Only Lily's will kept Scout with us. Mitchell's face reddened. His siblings hadn't known. You get to vote about Scout today. Vera's voice strengthened. But nobody asked me to vote about my daughter dying. Nobody asked if I wanted to keep living without her. Nobody asked Harold if selling our house was what he needed, or just what was convenient for everyone managing us. She looked at the residents, at Marcus, at the strangers who'd fought beside them. This dog is all I have left of my daughter's voice telling me I'm still allowed to grieve. If you vote him away, you're telling me grief has an expiration date, and mine expired on someone else's schedule. Vera returned to her seat beside Harold. Scout, waiting in their apartment 3 floors above, had no idea his fate was being decided by 23 strangers his person had trained him to comfort. George called for the vote. George Weatherby's voice cut through the emotional aftermath with union organizer precision. The council will now hear discussion before voting. Marcus stood, his cracked phone containing documentation that translated suffering into evidence institutions couldn't dismiss. He presented the photographs, timestamps, engagement measurements, medical observations. 17 residents, quantifiable improvement, therapeutic value documented with the compulsive care of someone who'd learned that systems only responded to their own language. David Chen added his journalist's authority. I verified that Meadowbrook's parent corporation has banned animals at 9 of 12 facilities in 18 months. Always using vague policy language, always after family complaints, never after surveying residents. A woman in her 80s, hands shaking with Parkinson's, raised her voice. Janine never asked us what we wanted. She asked families who visit twice a month what we need every single day. Another resident. Why do their complaints outweigh our preferences? We live here. They visit. The corporate specialist attempted to interject about liability protocols, but George, channeling 40 years of facing down management, ruled him out of order. The bylaws give this council voting authority on quality of life matters. That means residents decide. Not corporate, not families. Us. The question before them, should Scout remain at Meadowbrook with appropriate protocols? George called for a show of hands. The first hand rose slowly, Mrs. Chen thinking of 40 years of Pomeranians and 15 months of loneliness. Then Frank Morrison's functional right hand, remembering the dog who'd helped him speak. Ana Torres, in a moment of clarity, raised hers with Sophia guiding gently. More hands. The bedridden man who'd watched Dawn walks from his window. Barbara's roommate, thinking of her friend's desperate loneliness. A man who'd lost his wife last year and hadn't smiled since Scout visited. Hands rising like testimony, like witnesses to the radical idea that remembering mattered, that grief deserved accommodation, that love didn't expire on institutional schedules. Mitchell stood abruptly, his chair scraping institutional linoleum. He walked out before the count finished, his briefcase forgotten on the floor. The first thing Harold had seen his eldest son leave behind in 20 years. Kevin followed, always following, though he paused at the door and looked back at his parents with something that might have been apology. Diane stayed. Tears streaming, hands clutched in her lap, she stayed. George counted with the formality of someone who understood that dignity required procedure. 23 residents present, 21 in favor, 1 abstention, 1 opposed. Barbara Henning had abstained, wheelchair positioned at the edge of the semicircle, too overwhelmed by attention, the fight she'd started accidentally, to choose. The single no came from a resident who genuinely feared dogs, a veteran with PTSD, who'd been honest about his trauma from the beginning. The vote was advisory, not legally binding, but it carried the moral weight of 23 people reclaiming their right to decide what made life worth living. Harold stood, pulled Vera to her feet, and they walked out together to bring Scout the news that he could stay. 3 floors up, the old terrier waited by the door, gray muzzle resting on paws, still searching for the person who'd trained him, still serving the family she'd left behind. Day 26 began with bureaucracy translating humanity into protocol. The corporate specialist, calculating PR costs versus legal risks in the conference room Janine had surrendered for his use, approved a 6-month trial program. Scout would remain under formal therapy animal protocols designed by Sophia and approved by staff. Documentation, liability waivers, structured visit schedules. Marcus was promoted from night shift to activities director. Grief-fueled advocacy rewarded with institutional legitimacy and a budget to build something sustainable. Day 27, Harold and Vera signed agreements that turned their daughter's dog into official therapeutic intervention. Scout received credentials, scheduled hours, health check requirements. The paperwork transformed love into something systems could process. Mitchell didn't visit, didn't call. 3 days of silence while his parents waited for anger or abandonment, or the control that had defined their relationship since Lily died. Day 28, 7 p.m., Mitchell appeared at their door alone. No briefcase, no measured attorney tones, just their son standing in the hallway, 52 years old and finally breaking. "I'm sorry." Not smooth, not practiced, broken. He sat on their couch, the one from their old house, reupholstered but still sagging in the spot where he'd sat as a child. After Lily died, I couldn't look at Scout without seeing her absence. So I tried to erase the reminder. I tried to erase everything that made me remember her. Vera's hand found Harold's. They waited. "I stopped visiting you because your grief made my grief unavoidable. And if I let myself feel it," his voice cracked, "if I let myself feel it, I'd have to face that I wasn't there. That I was too busy with depositions and contracts while my sister was dying." Scout approached cautiously, the way Lily had trained him to approach people in acute distress. He sat 3 feet from Mitchell, waiting. An invitation, not a demand. Mitchell extended his hand. Scout moved forward, placed his gray muzzle beneath Mitchell's palm. Something in Mitchell's face collapsed, the control he'd maintained for 2 years shattering under the gentle weight of his sister's dog remembering him. "She loved you," Vera whispered, "even when you were absent, especially then." They sat together until after midnight, Scout dozing against Mitchell's leg, the 3 of them learning how to occupy the same space as a grief without demanding it, transform into something more comfortable. Day 29 brought Kevin and Diane. Kevin carried Lily's favorite flowers, purple irises, the ones that bloomed in their old garden every May. Diane brought photo albums they'd all been avoiding, the visual evidence of a daughter and sister who'd existed, who'd mattered, who deserved to be remembered aloud. They spread pictures across the dining table. Lily at 7, gap-toothed and fearless. Lily at 16, rolling her eyes at Mitchell's college acceptance speech. Lily at 23 with Scout, both of them young and healthy and unaware of cancer hiding in cells. They spoke her name, shared stories, cried and laughed and argued about details. Was it Michigan or Minnesota where she'd gotten food poisoning? Had her hair been blue or purple that semester? Which nephew had she taught to swear accidentally? Scout dozed on Mitchell's feet, physical bridge between past and present. Day 35 marked 5 weeks since arrival at Meadowbrook. The resident council met in the activity room, monthly now, with actual authority to vote on menu changes, activity schedules, policy adjustments. George Weatherby presided with union organizers' satisfaction, watching residents reclaim autonomy they'd internalized as lost. Scout had become the facility's unofficial therapy dog, with a waiting list Marcus managed through careful scheduling. Ana Torres had enough lucid days that Sophia brought her grandchildren to read beside her and the dog. 3 generations connected through touch when words scattered. Frank Morrison spoke in short sentences now, especially to Scout, his aphasia retreating incrementally through purpose. Mrs. Chen started a weekly pet memory group where residents shared stories of animals they'd loved, therapeutic reminiscence wrapped in practical advocacy. Barbara Henning attended every week, quietly, speaking occasionally about the 3 dogs she'd had in her 50s, before arthritis and loneliness had reduced her world to complaints. Marcus's grandmother was on the waiting list for transfer to Meadowbrook. He was saving for the upgrade in care level, working his second job with new purpose. This time, he'd win the fight before it was too late. David Chen's articles sparked state investigation into corporate elder care practices. Janine was transferred to a different facility, replaced by a director with actual gerontology credentials who treated residents like people rather than metrics. Day 62, Thanksgiving. The Castellanos children visited together for the first time in 2 years. They ate in the communal dining hall, surrounded by residents who'd become chosen family through the radical act of fighting beside them. Mitchell had begun pro bono work on elder advocacy cases, atonement through application of skills he'd previously used to manage rather than support. Kevin brought Lily's childhood dog collar, the small one from when she was 8 and Scout didn't exist yet. They placed it beside Scout's current collar, past and present acknowledged. Diane read aloud a letter Lily had written before dying, found in an old journal. If you're reading this, it means Scout is still with Mom and Dad. Thank you for letting them keep him. He knows how to sit with sadness without trying to fix it. We all need someone like that. Evening came. Harold and Vera returned to their apartment, Scout between them, as always. But now Lily's photos covered the walls, no longer hidden in boxes, no longer sanitized into convenient grief. Her laugh captured in images, her existence validated, her love made visible. Vera sketched at the small table, pencil moving across paper for the first time since Lily entered hospice. She drew Scout with the residents, capturing what her daughter's work had become. Harold wrote letters to grandchildren he'd withdrawn from after Lily died, reclaiming connections he'd thought lost to institutional living. Scout, 15 years old, slept peacefully between them. His work of holding a family together, through death, through institutions, through the terrible mathematics of loving someone you couldn't save, finally acknowledged. They'd built something from unbearable loss. A family not defined by blood or proximity, but by the radical act of fighting for what helps you remember how to be human.